Okay, hello and welcome to the Sexually Satisfied Woman. I am your host, Eva Blake. And in this series, I'm talking to a variety of experts who are uniquely qualified to discuss some of the most common challenges that women face in our sexuality. And over the course of this series, we're going to offer real practices, proven strategies, really rich conversations to help you boost your confidence, ditch the shame, and create truly remarkable relationships and intimacy so that you can have the sexual satisfaction that you deserve. And today, I'm joined by Mel Cassidy. Mel is a relationship coach and sex-positive nerd who guides social misfits and cultural rebels to experiences of joyful, embodied, authentic, open relationships. Mel is certified in counseling for intimacy and relationships and is a student of the Institute for the Study of Somatic Sexology, pursuing studies focused on trauma-informed relating. She is the curator of the Monogamy Detox online program, which is dedicated to creating trauma-sensitive spaces where all beings can flourish. She lives, loves, and dances on the unceded territories of the Comox Nation in BC, Canada. Welcome here, Mel.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you.
So I just want to start a little bit with your background. You've lived all over the world. You've had a variety of relationships that have influenced you. So can you tell us about how you came to be doing this work now?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I came from a very global background. I mean, my mother's family were refugees for 6 generations, and my mother herself was a third culture kid, and then I myself, I'm the third culture kid of a third culture kid, and so I think when you grow up between a lot of different cultures, you end up questioning all the things that people take for granted. You don't just accept the status quo. And so that's been a big part of the journey for me, is that even as a child, I was like, well, why can't I have relationships this way? So I think that, when I was younger, I was definitely oriented more towards non-monogamous connections. And then when I became a teenager, I sort of tried to explore that a bit, but the only way to do that was cheating. That was the only kind of like accepted way of being non-monogamous. And then I decided to do what you're supposed to do, I thought, when you become an adult, which is get married. And so I was on that relationship escalator with somebody for a number of years, but I was just not happy at all. I was depressed. It felt like a light inside of me had withered away, and it was very hard for me to find joy and pleasure. And along the way, we talked about opening up our relationship. We tried that out. It didn't quite work for our dynamic, and we ended up realizing that what we needed were very different things. So we went our separate ways. Mm-hmm. And as I started to dive into and explore this incredible world of polyamory and non-monogamy, I noticed that a lot of the people who were talking about it and doing it were coming from the perspective of being already in a primary partnership, of having a common law partner or spouse or somebody of that level of significance in their life. And I was in a stage where I didn't want that, but I didn't want to sacrifice the quality of connection. Like, I didn't just want to date very casually or sleep around. I wanted to be nurturing really meaningful connections. I just didn't want to end up marrying anybody.
Fair enough.
And I, at the time, I was like the only person I came across who was talking about these things and writing about it. And so, people started coming to me looking for information and advice. And I was like, look, I'm not qualified to give you advice other than tell you my own story, but let me go back to school and let's see if I can get qualified to actually help people better.
Great. So you talk to a lot of people about relationships, right? And so from the people that you talk to, what are most of us getting wrong about relationships? Either how to do them or what we expect out of them. Where are we making the most mistakes?
There's a lot of places that I think people will get caught in little sort of traps or holes. And, part of it is that we don't live in a culture that teaches us how to consciously approach relationships. And so we tend to do this very human thing where we assume that what we want are the same things that other people want. And that what commitment, I assume what commitment means to me is going to be what commitment means to other people as well. And of course, that isn't the case. We've all got a different background and a different story that's going to come into play with that. And so yeah, I think one of the common traps is people just make a lot of assumptions, and people will assume that we're going to be monogamous, or that our relationship is going to look a certain way, or that our sex life is going to look a certain way. And I find that making assumptions about those things is usually what trips us up. It's okay if we have a different viewpoint from our partners, but can we be conscious of it? Like, can we acknowledge it? Can we work with it rather than it just being an unspoken thing that we never address?
Right. Well, really well said, right? Because especially like in the beginning of relationships, there's so much excitement and like hot to trot, right? Like, I'm so into you for whatever reason, right? But we get like so swept up in the like, I have fallen in love. I've left the ground. My feet have come up from under me, right? And so there are a lot of conversations that we don't have.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's really what you're hearing from a lot of other people.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's exciting when we're in a new relationship, right? We get carried away. The hormones are intoxicating, and we live in a culture where we've been taught that we're going to find safety and security and long-term stability through having a partnership. And because we just don't have enough other resources for that in the kind of culture we live in here today, we have a kind of desperation, we have a hunger for it. And so we will sometimes sort of push faster than might actually be healthy in a connection, because we get caught up and all giddy and excited. And it's, when you're excited, or like, actually the better analogy is, when you're hungry and you go to the grocery store and you suddenly end up buying way more than you can actually eat.
Yes.
Sometimes you make poor choices.
Yes. Oh my God. And then you spend way too much money. That's my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think? Okay. I want to come back to this idea of being like swept up our feet, because it's such a wonderful experience to have, actually, right? There's so much, it's so invigorating, I think, right? So what do you think makes a remarkable relationship? What is it that makes a relationship just
exquisite relationship? I think it's about people meeting each other equally. A lot of people think that relationships have to be a kind of transactional thing, that we have to do tit for tat, and to meet equally means that we really honor and respect who the other person is, where they're at, where their boundaries are, what their capacity is, and that we also are fully expressed and owning our own boundaries and our own capacities, so that our partners know where they can engage. And I think when we have those spaces where we meet equally, we're able to dance with a lot more fluidity. And that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. That's a process. We have to first of all figure out where are all the places where we don't meet each other equally, where we're going to come into conflict, and we have to navigate that. But the long-term, really exquisite relationships are the ones where we learn how to do that. And some people have figured out how to do that early on in their connections too. And so they get to that place of exquisite beauty, I think, a little faster.
Mm-hmm. So you identify as a polyamorous relationship anarchist. So first, I would love for you to define what that means for you, because when we start unpacking identity, words that we use to identify ourselves, we can all use the same word and have really different meanings. So I'd love for you to just explain what that means for you, and then I have more questions.
Yeah. So relationship anarchy for me is about doing relationships out of the box. So, there's a sort of standard traditional way of doing intimate relationships. Relationship anarchy is about letting go of those rules, letting go of the expectations of those rules. And a lot of people will confuse it with political anarchy. Some people will relate it to it. I think it's useful to look at it as something separate. It's more like we're just stepping out of the confines that we've been given, that we've inherited from others, or the stories we've been told. So for me as a relationship anarchist, I don't necessarily label my relationships straight off, or at least if I have labels, they are descriptive rather than prescriptive.
Can you
And
give an example of that? What does that mean?
so rather than me just suddenly going to my partner and saying, "You're my boyfriend now," it's about, waiting and maybe even asking people who know us both and saying, "Hey, what do you see in our connection? How would you describe this connection?" And so I might describe somebody as my partner because the way that our dynamic expresses itself is partnership, is mutual support. Or I might describe somebody else that I'm with as a lover because the way that our dynamic expresses itself, maybe we're not as present in each other's life for daily support, but there is deep love and affection and intimacy when we are together.
Mm. That's
Does that make sense?
beautiful. Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. And I love that you ask other people, like, what do you see? What do you see in us? What do you see that's
Yeah.
happening? I think that's
Yeah.
something that we don't do in this culture at all, right? Because we, like you said, we get on the relationship escalator. We might have that, all of those really yummy, juicy feelings of intoxication where we're like,
Yeah.
should I go to work today or should I stay home and have sex with my new partner or my new lover, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so we don't often look outside of us to get some kind of affirmation or reflection about what it is that we're doing. I'm curious, from your experience of doing that, what have you learned about how other people see you in relationship?
Oh, that's a good question. I think having people reflect back to me what they see in me has helped me see where my strengths are in relationship and help me understand the kind of partner that I show up as. Um, you know, we can very easily create a fantasy of who we think we are, and that fantasy can be positive or negative. We can think we're all that, and maybe we're not, or we're not showing up as that in that moment. Or we might think that we're really not a great partner, or we might have negative self stories. But when you hear other people reflect back to you what's going on, I think it's a wonderful kind of reality check of, oh, wow, like this is what I'm giving. This is how I'm showing up. And you can kind of be like, is that what I want to be doing? Is there a way that I want to develop that and grow? And it gives us feedback that allows us to really, I think, um, be more in integrity with ourselves. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what important feedback, too, for us to have from outside of our relationship if we're being if our friends or our family are giving us the feedback that, hey, you're not really being a present partner,
Yeah.
right? That's really different
Yeah.
than your partner saying, hey, you're not seeing or hearing me, right? And then the person who's receiving that could easily be like, why do you have to nag me, or why do you have to be on my case, or right? And so it's really easy in a coupleship, right,
Yeah.
for us to kind of turn off a little bit, turn off our hearing with our partner.
Well, and this is part of the way that patriarchal monogamy functions. Patriarchal monogamy tells us that we have to have our relationships in isolation from each other. We get into this privacy culture, which goes into an extreme where we don't want anyone else to witness the tears or the shadows or the uncomfortable sticky pieces of our intimate relationships. But the thing is, we all experience that. And, for me, being both a relationship anarchist and someone who practices polyamory, so having honest, non monogamous relationships with the full knowledge of everybody involved, um, I'm immediately doing my relationships within a larger community of people. And you cannot have that degree of privacy there. People are going to see what's happening. People are going to be impacted by what's happening in another relationship. And so having more open communication and more open feedback and developing the layers of trust um and support and social village building around that is so vital. But when you can get to that place where you can give each other those reflections and support, it really builds very strong and beautiful relationships. It's not easy, but it's so worth it.
Mm-hmm. I love that you mentioned the patriarchal monogamy, the specific piece around privacy or secrecy, right?
Mhm.
And how when we stay in that kind of secrecy, it makes our world a lot smaller. It makes reaching out for help a lot harder. And when I talk to people, not just folks that I work with, but friends and extended friends, and when I go into my own training where I'm doing my personal growth work, the level of I don't want to ask for help because of the story that it will make me weak, or I will be rejected, or fill in the blank, right? That is so big. And when we're talking about something like the intimacy of our relationships, right? It has such a big impact on us personally, where we have to carry so much weight in our
And
relationship.
and one of the things I see so much is that people will be afraid to talk about it even with their partners. There's this, like, I have to shield my private struggles, even from the person that I'm closest to. And that is not healthy. I mean, if your partner isn't someone you feel safe talking about these things to, like, there's a lot of exploration you're going to need to do there about, like, is it about the partner? Is it about me? Is it about something in our dynamic? I mean, a healthy relationship is one where you can feel safe enough to express yourself without any fear of retribution or retaliation. But getting over the stories that tell us we're not allowed to express ourselves is that's the first step.
Yeah. And so how do, from your perspective, how do we get out of this autopilot, or off of the relationship escalator, and out of the, like, I have to manage everything by myself?
Yeah. It's a process. We are so engrossed in a culture that says that we have to have this kind of partnership in order to feel safe and stable and secure in our lives. And we have to first of all figure out the other strategies available to us for safety and security and stability. So that looks like reaching outside beyond our partnerships, building a community of support. I like to think of it, instead of a relationship escalator, can you create a relationship landscape? Who's in your relationship ecology? How is this ecology coming together in a way of mutual supporting? And once we have an alternative way to source our safety, or at least the primary source of our safety and stability and security, then the way that we're relating romantically is going to change, because we're no longer going after these romantic connections because we're seeking, like, somebody to fill a gap. We're going after connections in a way that allows them to be celebrations.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I love this idea of a landscape, right? Because this gives us an idea that there can be many seasons of relationships, that we can travel between landscapes, right? That there's just a lot more diversity of opportunity available to us.
Hmm.
I love that. So, one of the things that you do in Monogamy Detox, right, is you're asking these questions, right? Not just like the landscape of relationships, but what are some of the other big questions that you're helping people answer when they're trying to unpack or uncouple themselves from this patriarchal monogamy?
Well, the first thing we do is we have to look at, how is that hangover from monogamy showing up in your life? How has it showed up in your relationship so far? Where has it been kind of driving you to go? Because once we become more conscious of that, we can start to looking at all the alternative strategies for getting those needs met. Out, beyond the safety and security, we have a desire to feel valued. We have a desire to feel seen. And so how else can we have that met? But then we also need to dive into, like, what are all the other core needs that we have underneath that? And so we start to build up a better self catalog of who we are and what really allows us to feel like we are loved.
Mm.
Um, and then we need to work on understanding what is our capacity. So I do a lot of somatic work with folks, and I may not always use the terminology, but it's all coming from somatics, to help people understand, like, well, what actually feels good for me, what doesn't feel good for me, and what do I realistically have the capacity for? Because I found that a lot of conventional boundary work only talks about your yes and your no. And dealing especially with relationships in non-monogamy, where we want to believe that love is infinite, we are confronted with the reality that time is not. And that got me thinking, well, there's other ways that our capacity can be limited. Sometimes we just don't have the capacity for a certain dynamic at a certain time because we're going through challenges. We're overwhelmed with work, with life, with health, with other partners, with kids, with family. We might feel overwhelmed because of trauma that we are still working on integrating and healing. So recognizing what we actually have the capacity for is a huge piece of this. And so going through those pieces, we look at all the different qualities of this relationship landscape. I look at it in 4 different quadrants. We have emotional relationships, we have social relationships, we have practical relationships, and we have erotic relationships. And in each of these, what is it that we desire? What is it that we definitely do not want? And what do we actually have the capacity for? And with that is also this question of, well, what do I have to offer the other people that come and relate to me in this quadrant?
It's beautiful. The question, what do I have the capacity for, right? I've been to so many different poly or non-monogamy conversations or panels or whatnot. And one of my favorite takeaways was, if you're not down to process, you are not down for polyamory, right?
Yeah.
Because it requires so much conversation, right? And so this idea that love is infinite, but time is not, right? I think that one of the places where I see a lot of conversation is the Google Calendar, right? Making sure that we're sharing the Google Calendar, and that that we're sharing the Google Calendar, and that we know whose day it is to do what, and like what we have that availability for. But I love that you're asking this question about capacity, because it makes me think about how much energy do I actually have to invest in a dynamic or a conversation, right? Like, if I may love you very deeply, and if we keep having conflict around the same thing or around a variety of things, right? How much energy do I actually have to invest in this ongoing negotiation, right? And that's really different than just, did it fit on the Google Calendar, and did I get my day and you got your day?
Yeah. And again, that kind of Google Calendar juggling, trying to make everything very egalitarian, doesn't actually allow us to really explore where our conflict intimacy is. And conflict intimacy is so important. That's about being able to sit comfortably with disagreement and with, I'm not going to be able to get all my needs met. And, I think in our culture today, we're not used to being uncomfortable. We're used to having comfort all the time. And being able to sit with discomfort in any kind of intimate relationship, whether it's polyamorous or monogamous or something else, I think is a very important skill. And to do that, we have to really develop and enhance our ability for compassion and patience and kindness with one another. So that, yes, we have our own needs and we want to have our needs met, but we also have to recognize what are the capacity and limitations of everybody else who's within our ecology.
Beautiful. What are some of the other qualities that would do us well if we want to be in a monogamous relationship, right? I mean, yes, there's the calendar, compassion and humility and kindness. You've talked about just understanding how much capacity you have in general, right? Not being in a land of expectations, especially unspoken expectations. Those are pretty harsh, right? But what are some other just like qualities that are valuable for us to create a really great relationship?
I think having more and more self-awareness, like always being open to that self-inquiry, is really important. We have the potential to be constantly learning new things about ourselves, and um, you know, getting a better picture of how our past experiences may be coloring our current experiences. So unpacking, like, is there a trauma or a story from my past that's directing my desires right now? Or am I running away from something through what I'm doing? Bringing that conscious awareness, I think, is very, very important. In my journey, I described it as coming into a primary relationship with myself. I definitely, and as I think many other people have learned, especially, when if those of us who've been socialized and brought up as girls, we're taught that in order to show somebody we love them, we have to be self-sacrificing. We have to be willing to make that sacrifice. And it was hard for me to learn that martyrdom is not actually a love language, and that I have the permission to step into power for myself. And part of doing that was getting into that powerful self relationship. So all the questions that I kept asking other people, all the things that I kept doing for other people when I was attracted to them, I switched it around and started doing that for myself.
Can you give a couple of examples of what you mean by that?
So taking myself out for a really nice dinner. There's one of my favorite restaurants in Vancouver. I would make it a regular ritual of reserving a table and going there solo and having a beautiful dinner with candlelight and live music and everything. And that was something that certainly when I was married, I would never have considered doing for myself. It was something I might have saved up to be able to buy for my partner, but doing that for myself felt like, why? No, I must be a terrible person if I do that. But getting into a practice of doing things like that, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. Doing something lovely for yourself like that might be going for a walk and picking flowers that you bring home and make a beautiful arrangement with. Doing something for yourself might be as simple as like shutting off your computer early and putting on some good music. And there's lots of ways to do that exquisite self-loving, but it helps to teach our nervous system that we don't need to always be looking to be of service to others, that we actually can meet our needs ourselves. And what that allows our relationships to do is become spaces of free celebration rather than spaces where, oh, I have limited resources, and so how am I going to deal these out, and am I getting am I being reciprocated in this? We get into a kind of lack mentality too easily in the way that the sort of traditional patriarchal monogamy has conditioned us.
It's just so beautiful, right? I'm imagining you at a candlelight dinner right now, and I'm falling in love with this image and thinking about how often we're told that that's only something that you do if you don't have a lover. Like that's what you do when you are in lack. And what you're really saying is like, no, this is like a big gift of generosity that I give to myself. So I love how you are reframing that for all of us.
Yeah.
I just forgot what I was going to say. So you also mentioned something about martyrdom is not a love language, and this idea that we have to be giving and giving. And I know that I have been in relationships where when I feel stressed out and I then go into a relationship or I'm like in the same room with somebody that I love dearly, I can feel like, what do you need from me? Right. And like, why are you taking from me? Right. And so I have nothing to offer because I feel so, stressed. Right. And, I wonder about that dynamic, how often that repeats, right? Not just for me and for other people, but how often that shows up in all of the other kinds of relationships that I have. Right. Can you speak to this kind of pattern? How the sort of in the coaching world, we call it, right, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah.
Right. So can you talk about what you see in this realm?
Yeah, I mean, we become self-sacrificing in every part of our lives. I've seen it for people in the workplace. We become compromised. We want to please our boss, or we want to please our manager, or we want to please our coworkers. We don't want to ruffle any feathers. Yeah, sure, I'll stay extra time, even though we're exhausted. I've seen it happen in friendships. We let our friends kind of push our boundaries or push our edges. We say yes to doing something with them, even though it's not really something that's going to fulfill us. And I think it's important to differentiate. Like there's a point where we can do a thing for a short amount of time, even if we're not super into it, and we're fine. That doesn't deplete us. But if all we're ever doing are things that are not feeding us, that are not nourishing to us, then we go into a space where we are enduring. And that space of endearing, it's kind of like having a pebble in your shoe. And you're like, oh, I'm fine. Really, I'm fine. I just need to walk another block and I'll be fine. But the pebble is still there. And you end up feeling blistered. And so we do this in work. We do this with friendships. We often do it with our families. We compromise on our own boundaries. And it takes a while to develop that sense of inner knowing, to notice when we're stepping out of integrity with ourselves, when we're stepping into that place of self-sacrifice, and then to go back and go, actually, no, what I need to do right now is this. And looking after our own boundaries, looking after our capacity, not falling into martyrdom, is a way that we can be more loving to people around us, because it's a way that we maintain and enhance our own personal capacity. And the more capacity we are nurturing for ourselves, the more present we can actually be for the people that we love and care about.
Mm-hmm. So what a great thing for us to remember, that if we feel like we have a pebble in our shoe, right, it's actually a good warning sign.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the fire alarm is going off, right? It's like I'm smelling smoke, right? We need to take a different tack. We need to change directions.
Totally.
So you mentioned somatics earlier, and on this series, I've had a variety of other somatic teachers and practitioners, and I want to invite you to share, like, what is the value of having a somatic practice or even a somatic understanding when we are creating relationships, or when we want to deepen a relationship, we want to deepen the intimacy, perhaps if we've been in a relationship for a long time and we maybe have been on autopilot and we want to come out? Like, what is the value of a somatic practice?
I think because somatics teach us to slow down and really tune into that inner knowing. In terms of intimate relationships, it's helping us to steer away from that martyrdom, steer away from that self-sacrificing, and hopefully it is empowering us to show up more as our authentic selves, rather than trying to play into a projection of who the other person thinks we are, and vice versa. When we are slowing down and allowing ourselves to move with more ease and at a natural pace, from being aware of somebody that we're attracted to feeling safe with them, to building intimacy, and then maybe finally having a relationship. When we slow that process down, it really allows for more deeper seeing and knowing of one another, right? And again, somatics come into this place of, these are one of the best tools we have for resourcing our nervous systems to know that we are safe. And if we have multiple ways of creating somatic safety in our lives, then we're not going after our partners with a hunger for them to fill that need. And if both people or all people in a relationship are doing somatic based work, and they're all coming into relationship from a space of abundance, of safety, I mean, that's a game changer. The whole nature of the relationship can then be about, let's celebrate and let's be tender and kind with all the different pieces of who each other are. And so for me, somatics has been the biggest thing that has transformed my relationship life. And that's why I've gone into deeper studies and want to support other people in learning it and bringing it into their relationships too.
Beautiful. There's the idea that we can be so self-sourced that we can show up and be really in a place where we're meeting each other, rather than like in some kind of push-pull that leaves us feeling depleted or tired or resentful of the other person.
Exactly.
We have to leave it here. Thank you so much, Mel. This is a wonderful conversation. We could go on and on for sure. I want to just let everyone know that you can find Mel at radicalrelationshipcoaching.ca, because she's in Canada. And I just want to thank you so much for your time and your passion on this subject and all of these related subjects. It's a real joy to talk with you today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And to all of our viewers, please come back tomorrow for another really rich conversation on relationships and sexuality. I look forward to seeing you again next time.